what are you doing over here?
It is 10 o'clock on my phone, so we are just gonna start. We are recording this, so this will be in the next record officer newsletter, probably. How many of you are record officers? Excellent. Any attorneys besides my boss? Chief Administrative Officer? Sort of?
Deputy recorder.
Okay. Okay, so this is just something I always thought would be really cool. I've been working with the State Records Committee and the Government Record Office since 2020. And I always thought it would be really nice to have some record officers get together and just get some advice from a requester, a record officer, and a CAO about things that they've learned about the process and maybe some tips that they could share along the way. So I've got some questions together, and after, if you guys have some questions you would like to ask, we're just going to turn it into a conversation, okay? And then we'll go as long as we go with an end time. But if we finish early, but if we end early, then that's just fine. And so to introduce our panelists, Eric Peterson is the founder of the Utah Investigative Journalism Project. And we have Melanie Marlow, who is a director at the Department of Public Safety. It's, what is the division called? It's improvement something.
System quality and process improvement. So I handle everything for DPF on how to improve our systems, things we can do better. Just if something's broken, I help fix it. And that's kind of the gist of what I do.
Awesome. And then Nancy Dean is the recorder for Clearfield and used to sit on the State Records Committee as a local government representative. So we're going to go right into this. My first question, and I don't know if we just want to go down the row or somebody who wants to go first. What are some tips you have that could make the process of responding to requests smooth and peaceful? Like, how do you avoid pulling your hair out when you get a record request? And so let's start at the end with Nancy.
Yeah, I think it's a hard one because sometimes the requests are hard. But something I've learned in my career is always approach it that the records are public. Start from that point and then see if there's reasons why you should redact or withhold something, and make sure that those reasons are tied to the statute. But I mean, we always come at it at my city as from the approach that these records are public and belong to the public. And we really try, not always perfect at it, but we really try to release as much as we can. Communication with the requester is really important. I know there are some people that the communication is never going to be easy. So, but sometimes residents just need a little bit of help navigating the process. And I think that it's important to try and help be that intermediary for them. So, yeah, that's my notes.
I would say understand the requests. A lot of times when you get into it, you can figure out if it's something that you can do, something you can help with. And I mimic your response as well as how always approach it as how can my agency help? There's going to be things that you cannot do, and by statute, both your agency statute and GRAMA statute of things that you can and can't. So it's best to approach it with how can I help? In addition to that, also like Nancy said, there's times that it's best that you communicate what you can do, where you cannot help with the requester. They don't always know how to approach it. They don't always know what you can and can't do. you can guide them, you can educate, you can have those conversations before you even begin starting to approach the request and finding records for it. And to that point as well, I would also recommend that do a thorough search. There's going to be times that you have things that you can give, and you're going to have that list of, yes, I can give you this, but I cannot give you this based on this statute. And so just be very thorough, communicate, and have a good conversation with those requesters. They're not intending to create an environment that is adversarial. They want information and they're looking to you for guidance on how to get that. So it's my advice to be that good customer service representative for your agency and help them out where you can.
I think it's interesting. I'm just going to echo everything that's been said, but I think the communication thing is really important, but it can be a little tricky depending on the request because maybe it's just an average citizen. They're concerned about something, and it's probably going to be affecting them, right? Their taxes or some kind of encounter with law enforcement or something like that. Or maybe it's a reporter and they're looking into something. What's funny is oftentimes I've seen the records officer will say something like in an email. It's like, so why don't you tell me what you're writing about, or what your story is about, or what you're really after. And I know in my rational brain that it's a very innocent question. But I think as kind of like a cynical reporter, and this, I'm sure this applies to a lot of citizens who might feel like maybe they feel like they've been aggrieved by an agency. They might be a feeling do I trust this person? I might be trying to get records that might be embarrassing to this agency. Maybe I feel like I have to hold some cards close to my chest. And I think that's, I don't think that's ever really the intention of a records officer. But I kind of suspect that it might be, if you were able to have a conversation with a requester about a request and you don't quite understand it, you could put some feelers out there to say if there's, maybe we could talk a little bit about what you're really trying to find, and then maybe I can help you identify specific types of documents, and this will help you if you do other requests with other agencies, if you're kind of giving them some empowerment, some practical advice in being a requester. That they can say oh, okay, that's good to know, 'cause I find there's a lot of times people who are new to GRAMA or new journalists or student journalists, sometimes they're making a request based on kind of an idea of something that they think there should be a particular document for it, and there just might not be. It might just be something that's in multiple different documents in your department, but they have no idea. So I think if you can kind of have a conversation, and I think if it's an actual conversation will be a lot better than maybe just an email where you say okay, so you're interested in, maybe these types, I think what you want is, this is what the document is called, maybe give more practical advice like that. Another thing that's interesting is sometimes as a reporter, I might put in a request for information, and if somebody asks me well, what's your story about? I might not know until I get the information. I think it's okay as a reporter to use GRAMA to, get some information to maybe try and see, is there a trend going on here? Is the number of workplace investigations for fatalities in Utah, is it going up, or is there a lot of police call outs to a particular address? I don't know until I file that GRAMA. And I think sometimes these types of GRAMAs can, if you're not careful, can become really overly broad, right? And if a requester's I want all of this, all of that, right? Um, So that might be another opportunity to have a conversation, say like, hey, it's okay if you don't know exactly, you're just curious about something. Maybe we can, I'm not telling you how to do your grandma, but like you might find it better to start off a little bit smaller with your request, instead of asking for, all of these communications the past 10 years or something or whatever, more specific time frame or something like that. And then when you get the records, you'll kind of get a sense of like, oh, should I ask for more? I mean, these are the kinds of like advice like I try to give to like reporters and stuff is like, be specific. You're going for like a bigger data project or something, start small. Don't, start off by asking for everything because you don't know what you're going to get. I think like those kinds of conversations where like, especially if somebody's like talking to a records officer and they're helping them kind of like brainstorm a little bit, and having a conversation, will help them maybe get past that kind of suspicion that like, well, why do they want to know what my story is about or what I'm after? Are they trying to shut me down or something like that? And of course, these aren't all requesters, right? Some are just pretty simple requests, but I think about like reporting projects and things like that, it is an awkward situation sometimes because you might be looking into something that's possibly gone wrong with an agency, right? And so, the records you're after might be embarrassing. So like it's an awkward exchange sometimes, but I think like if everybody is communicating on a level of, as been discussed, public records, and then talking kind of practical, like how can I help you get what I can give you? I think that's a really good way to kind of have a relationship with the requester.
Yes, thank you. So you've really addressed a lot of my next question. So let's ask Melanie, what are some tips and strategies you have for working with requesters when you don't really understand the request?
So I would recommend, again, having that conversation, but there's going to be times that, as Eric mentioned, the requester doesn't fully understand what it is they're asking for. They're looking for records related to something. And the best advice I could give you is to have that healthy conversation, guide that process. But then to the other point is know where your records fit in the grand scheme of things. There are going to be things that you can't provide. There's going to be records that exist that you can't provide because of a statute that's been established. In our case, a lot of times it's an active investigation. At some point in time, I'll be able to give them to you, but right now I cannot. It's just knowing where you can and can't do something, understand exactly where those records fit in the grand scheme of things and what you can provide. And to that as well, I would also recommend understanding where the direction that GRAMA is going as far as the legislative session. If you can entertain the conversation, be part of that conversation when the legislative session comes around, so you understand what's coming, you understand how best to approach those records and knowing the direction things are going and how that fits into your environment. But with it, keeping it easy for you is understanding exactly what they're looking for, communicate if you don't understand, and then to the third point, utilize the resources you have available. You have the CAOs in your office, you have attorneys available, you have the records group here that we're working with today. They're great resources, and none of this is intuitive. None of it's easy. It's a very big gray area where you're in the middle of it, but understanding how you fit into that world and what you can and can't do, and then using the resources that you have available. But it's not intended to be hard in respect to complicating your world. It's just guiding the process and how best to meet in the middle for a requester, make sure that you can help where you can.
And Nancy, what would you say for record officers if you don't understand the request?
From a municipal side of these, sorry, allergies this time of year. Some municipalities don't have an attorney in-house. So to call their attorney, it costs them $200 an hour, right? To try and have a conversation with them. And so I do think that state archives is a huge Monica, Rebecca are just huge helps whenever you need a little guidance on something. These can help you guide in the statute and try and understand how a particular record might be viewed. And so I think that's a really valuable resource. I do think, I have to agree with Eric, picking up the phone is a completely different conversation than email or text, trying to clarify and find out what the requester is asking for. I know I do have a little PTSD because I had a vexatious requester at one point. And my phone conversations with that individual were really, really tough. And so every time before I pick up my phone, I'm like, deep breath. And really, he's the only one when I've talked to him on the phone, it was really difficult. Most everybody else just is really grateful for the help. And I was thinking of an experience that I just had in the last couple of weeks. The Justice Court brought me over a records request, and the guy had written up the side and on the back and underlined things, and only had one word and another word here, and I was looking at it trying to figure out how I could help him, right? So I called him and we had a great conversation. Because he actually wanted everything that was given in. One of the things he wanted, there were many, was everything that his attorney had been given in discovery. And of course he wants unredacted, and I was able to explain that GRAMA's a different process than discovery. We can give you information, but it may have redactions, right? And helped explain some of those processes and how they were different to him, and why the attorney our prosecutor can't talk to you because you are represented by an attorney, and just trying to know how that whole process works so that you can help them navigate it. We ended that conversation really well. He actually withdrew that records request. And which wasn't my intention, but I mean, he filed one that was much more specific to what he knew that he should address with us. And so it ended up being a good experience for him and a good experience for me. We would not have arrived at that with just text or email. We wouldn't have. It's face to face or on the phone is a really good way to address that.
Awesome, thank you. As a follow-up, one understanding the request and a request that isn't reasonably specific in statute are a little bit different. Would you add anything else to that advice if they have a request that isn't reasonably specific? Is it the same, just pick up the phone and have a conversation, or do you approach those requests differently?
I think I still pick up the phone. I was surprised I wasn't asking him to withdraw that request and do another one. He chose to do that on his own. I was making notes, and it's an answer to one way. Just keep notes, make sure you're tracking what you're doing, making notes about what your conversation was about, so that you can refresh your memory if the process goes on for a long period of time. And if you end up before the director having an appeal. So, and so generally when I don't get too many that aren't reasonably specific, they're usually looking for a particular one. But I'll pick up the phone, right? And I'll make notes and have a conversation and then say, so are we agreed? And then I'll follow up with an email that says, following our conversation, this is how I'm going to proceed with your request, so that I have it in writing that we had a phone conversation and that what my understanding was from that.
Melanie, would you want to add anything?
Yeah, actually, I would. And we have in our agency very, very broad requests. We have people that understand things as well as they can understand them. And again, it is picking up that phone and having that conversation, because they're asking you based on their understanding. And so you're going to have to assume also from your agency perspective of the requester has a limited understanding of what records you have available and what you can and can't provide. And it's your role in this, the GRAMA process to help guide and their understanding of that is we have records related to this, and if they understand it, will be focusing the request on that. But there's going to be times that they've asked for everything because they don't understand it. Well, this is what I can provide. Can you help me narrow the scope so I can get you closer to what you're looking for? But it is that conversation. There's been times we've had requests come in that aren't for our agency. We handle highway patrol requests, and it'll be a law enforcement request from another agency, and it's our understanding, and it's how we understand our records and how we understand our role in that bigger picture. If we can get you to the agency that's more reasonably responsible for it, or guide you to that process, or again, going back and these are the records we can give you, help me guide that process for you. So it's not as simple as sending an email or a response letter. You really need to help people understand what you can and can't do, and where you can provide something. So again, it goes that customer service role. So use that phone, use that, if somebody prefers email, be very thorough in your response. So there's as clean of an understanding as you can give somebody.
What you, Eric?
Yeah, I was thinking more about like broad requests. Kind of mentioned before, like it's interesting, somebody like requests too much all at once. You might be in a situation where you're like, if you're not having that conversation and you're just looking at the scope of what they requested, and then, maybe you're talking to your boss and you're like, well, if we do this, like, how much is it going to cost? And then, you send an email back to the requester and it's like, okay, we can do it. It's going to cost thousands of dollars or something like that. And that, that's something I've experienced in the past. And I know other requesters, just citizens, reporters, sometimes you make a big request, agency tries to like kind of come up with some kind of estimate, and it's usually pretty high. And I think that exchange can maybe make the requester feel more suspicious, like, oh, you're just trying to like scare me off with like a big figure. But going back to like, I kind of mentioned this example before, like when I first started my nonprofit, I brought up the example of workplace fatalities. I did a story about, I was just curious, like how the Utah OSHA office investigated workplace fatalities. And I made this mistake with this story. I was like, okay, I want all of the fatality investigation documents for the past 10 years. And they kind of did their best estimate. I was like, we think that's gonna cost like $2,000. And I was like, oh, okay, all right, let's scratch that. Let's just do this category, and let's just start there. And then they're like turned it around and like did not take that long. And then it was like, okay, let's do another category, another category. And so it took a little bit longer, but then I actually ended up getting all of the documents I wanted, the same 10-year time frame. Instead of being 2,000, it ended up being like 250, something like that. And I don't know, like if that's even something like when you kind of have this conversation with somebody and they've got a really broad request, you might say to them like what if you like just requested start here, and then see what the records are, and that'll give you an idea if you want more. And it might also help us really figure out actually how long it takes to process your request, because maybe we're off, maybe we both get going and this will be a cheaper, easier process. But maybe let's start with, one small bite of the apple instead of the whole thing. So I think sometimes that context, again, like, like a good conversation can be really helpful. I mean, I know I've had like requests in the past when I first started where I want, you know, emails with this search term from all of the employees in your office. And, then having a conversation, with somebody who's like, that's like hundreds and hundreds of people, like that'll take forever. It's like, oh, I did not realize, it could be that bad. So, I don't know, context, brainstorming. I think there's got to be a fine line where you can kind of talk with the requester and make suggestions and not have it be perceived as like you're trying to, stifle their use of GRAMA or what they're after, but could talk practically about it and say, like, maybe if we do this, we can get to a solution that's easier for everybody. And you try it out, and if you don't like it, you can always go back to your original request, and we'll just have to figure it out that way. But maybe there's a better way we can work together.
Thank you. My next question, I want to start with Melanie. So a lot of record officers may feel like they did something wrong if an appeal goes to the chief administrative officer. And or if it even goes further to the government record office or to court, what would you say to those record officers?
Don't let that scare you. It's not to point out and say that you've done something wrong. It's, again, going back and having that conversation. It's going to happen, and it's not pointing out that you had done anything wrong. It's not pointing out that anybody is right or wrong in this scenario. It's, again, going to the table and say, okay, these are the facts, these are what we can and can't do. And it's helping somebody, it's helping guide that process. So that appeal is never intended to be scary. It's part of the process. It's giving somebody the ability to say, well, this is what I want. I don't quite understand. And it's gone past the point where we're having this conversation and it's not working. It's giving that next level review of something. We've had appeals that have come through, and I highly encourage other members of our staff to be part of that appeal process to see how it works. It's not scary. In fact, that's the comment that always comes back and says, that's not what I expected at all. That wasn't hard. And that's exactly right. It's just giving everybody an opportunity to sit at the table and fully understand why, the reasoning, what's there, and just having additional discussion. Granted, it's a formalized process, yes, but it's not intended to be adversarial. It's not intended to be scary. It's just giving us one more level to review it and a different set of eyes on something from the CAO's perspective, and then obviously from the appeals process down the line. It's just another set of eyes to look at it and make sure that we did everything right. One point of that as well is it also gives you the ability to see if something's not quite working. We've had instances where we've done the best we can. We're buried in this, and it happened. The one I'm referring to in particular, it was as part of this appeal process, and I think you were on that panel with our video redaction group, that we came back and we had a great conversation as part of this and figured out, hey, we can maybe do this and go this route. And it was a great opportunity to work with everybody in the room on how best to go forward with something. So it's not a horrible, bad experience. It isn't just an opportunity to figure out how best to go forward with something, to do better with something, how more or less how can we do things, how can we not do things, and just having the support system in place in order to make sure that things are where they need to be for everybody involved.
Eric, what would you say to a record officer that feels anxious about an appeal?
Well, I mean, I think I would understand, like, I mean, if I was a records officer, I'd probably maybe take it a little bit personal, but like, I don't think it should be personal. And ideally, like, I hope that, like, I think like appeals probably should just be like kind of a misunderstanding. The only the only appeals that really bother me are when a records officer and maybe the CAO just ignore the request. That'll really bug me. I mean, I think we spent a lot of time talking about communication and really trying to like have a human to human conversation with the requester. If you're in a situation where like the request just gets ignored, whether that's intentional or not, I mean, it's the opposite, of what we're talking about. And like, that's going to make me or anybody else feel like they've really been ghosted, and more likely to be upset. Like if I get an official denial letter and it's got everything explained out and list the, tells me why, under the code something's denied, how I appeal, like it's like, I don't take that personal at all. It's like, okay, well, I can understand and now I can decide what I want to do here, but like we're having a process, but a lack of communication through ignoring a request, I think is a real mistake. And sometimes, obviously, that just happens unintentionally. Sometimes you get busy. We all understand that, but times where I've like appealed because something was ignored, it's always been helpful. Like when the records clerk comes back and says, "Oh, this just got lost in the shuffle. I've had a lot going on. A lot on my plate at the time." And I think anyone can understand that. So.
Nancy, what would you say to that record officer?
Yeah, as a records officer, it's been really right. I don't, the first time was so scary, like, we did end up at the state records committee my first time. But the thing I learned from it was an opportunity to learn. And I began to approach grandma completely differently than I had started before that process. And started viewing the ownership of records and the how can we help came so differently by having been through that process, that it became an experience that it doesn't scare me anymore, right? We don't get up to the director yet anymore, but I mean, I hope we don't. Love to see the director occasionally, but I mean, we like to try and resolve it if we can before we get there. I think the director, the CAO, I feel like they have a VA privilege. I went to a training recently where they told me that I have VA privilege, and I don't interpret it that way in grandma. I don't know how anyone else does, but I try to approach it like, I'm looking at grandma, I'm the reasons I can withhold a record, whatever. And then at that point, I'm applying the laws, I understand it, and that this to me is what's the way it is to be assessed, right? And so I think the CAO has more latitude to do things that maybe I can't or shouldn't do. And so I try to look at it is, because sometimes I would just like to give a correct, but when I apply all of the standards that I feel that I should, it has redactions or something. Like, if he wants to decide that they could have that or not have redaction, great, that's on his shoulders, that's not mine. And sometimes that happens. Like, he applies the Wayne provision and he allows for release. But I don't feel like it's my fault. I feel like he has more authority than I do to provide parts of that record. And so if you can just look at it, you're the first step in the process. And that's just the next step. It's a process. And if you can remember that as you go way through it, I think it really helps. And that's the other thing that I really love. It's just, I love to learn. And so it's just a learning process. And sometimes I'm wrong. Like I said on state records committees, sometimes the reason state records committee got fired. So, but that's life. We learn and grow. So.
What if you get a request and there are no records, or something exists, but it's not a record as defined in GRAMA? What would you think is the best approach to answering those requests where you don't have any records? You want to, let's start with you again, Nancy.
Well, one of our responses, there are no known responsive records, right? Because you know how sometimes when you get to the appeal process, all of a sudden somebody comes up and says, "Oh, look at that," and you're like, so we use that approach. If I know that something exists, but it does qualify as a record, because I was having this conversation with my guys, we'll do on that. I tend to point to the statute of definition of what a record is not. And I don't tell them, well, this calendar exists. Right, but I let them know, hey, calendars, notes, whatever's in that statute aren't records. You know, so to just, but I don't say, hey, the calendar exists, you should ask for it, you know, type thing, but I will point them to the statute that explains what it is not. So that's like.
Thank you, Melanie.
So in our case, there's oftentimes, we have driver's license, we have highway patrol, we have agencies that will have records in some way, shape, or form. It is our practice to say, while a record exists, you are not entitled based on the statute citation. And in our case, the transparency is super important. We want to make sure that while we can't provide it, we also indicate that a record is there. We don't explain what specifically the record is. And we don't lead you down that path. It's just if you're not entitled to it, it's not something we're going to provide. For no record situation, it goes back to making sure you're thorough on your search. No known records, but it's highly encouraged to make sure you do that thorough search and not just shut somebody down and say, well, we don't have a record. Yes, we've looked, we've done an extensive search, we don't have anything in relation to that. We've had requesters come back and say, are you sure? And it's going back and saying and being very articulate in our responses saying we don't have a record that's relates to this, and they're really explaining that. So search, make sure you're very thorough in your response, and your agency is going to guide that process as well. As if there's, in our case, there's records, they exist. We're not going to say they don't, but that being said, it's not something we can provide you.
Yeah, that's too sad. That's what I thought. I just finished a records request where they asked for a lot of things, and the response from the department was, we don't have any records, we don't have any records. And so when I'm preparing to respond to the individual and I'm reading their request, I call up the department and I say, okay, let's talk about what does and does not exist. And I ask them questions using what the person's asked for to just try and spur in their minds that maybe a record exists that you're not thinking about, even though I don't know every record that they have, right? But as I ask them questions, sometimes they think of things that they didn't think about. And so that's how I try to defend that we did a thorough search, is that I just didn't accept from the department giving me the records that they had given me everything. When they tell me there isn't or that, and I think there should be something, I always pick up the phone and say, hey, we need to talk about this. I need to make sure that there really isn't something here. Let's have a conversation.
But you,
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I know you're not in a position to tell the requester, look here, and if you want, I wouldn't mind. But I think yeah, I wonder if there's some kind of transparency or some kind of disclaimer. I don't know if maybe it goes out in a response where you say just so you know, there are some documents that under the law aren't considered records, or there are records and maybe we're not able to provide them to you. Some of that kind of language goes out in a lot of different responses. Maybe it's a conversation, maybe it's something a little bit more plain English just to let people know, yeah, maybe there's a piece of paper, but maybe it doesn't, for whatever reason, qualify as a record, or it's not a record that can be given to you. I do think I like the idea too, if you can kind of talk to the requester, maybe even about say well, this is how I did the search. These are the people I contacted, that could be useful. And I think maybe an agency should be more proactive about transparency when I think there's a strong presumption that there should be a kind of record. I remember my reporter, Sydney, we had a hearing before the Records Committee a year or so ago where we got emails from, I think it was Division of Workforce Services, and one of the emails talked about, it was this discussion about Medicaid, and in one of the emails, person said, oh yeah, this was what we were texting about. And when we put in the request for text messages, they're like, no text messages. Like, you said there's text messages. And then took an appeal and, going to the committee before we found out that they were not considering text messages to be records. And so it's like, come on. So I mean, like, like if somebody's just like has no idea and they think there should be some kind of record, I don't know what to say there, but like, sometimes there are certain things where it's like, yeah, there are other records, there's other indication, there's other evidence that there should be this kind of record, maybe that warrants a further conversation, some kind of disclosure, something, some measure of transparency, even if it's not telling a person what to request, but to say like, um, this might just not be considered a record under the law, but you still have an opportunity to appeal that if you want, and that question can get answered separately, through the appeals process.
I found that the thorough responses, rather than just there are no records, has definitely gone a long way to generate goodwill with requesters, right? What is something, let's start with you, Eric. What's something that you've learned about the GRAMA appeals process that you wish every record officer understood?
Let's see, about the appeals process. I think, I think, yeah, I think like working with the requester is really important. It's interesting because there's like, we kind of talk about, there's kind of like, there's the law and then there's like this kind of, I don't know if they're like dual tracks, right? Like, because there's the request, the response letters, appeals. And there's also like what we've been kind of talking about is like having a conversation with the requester, something more informal, helping them navigate a process, understanding their rights. One thing I'm concerned about though is that uh, both things are important, right? There should be official responses. There should be official notice to a requester saying, like these are your rights. We denied the records. This is why. One thing I've noticed that I find troubling is sometimes, I put in a request and then a response comes back that's like, here's your records, and then that's it. It's like, or was this all the records? Did you withhold any records? If I disagree with this, who do I appeal to? And like, I know to ask those questions, but in other situations, sometimes with my nonprofit, I like talk with just regular citizens about grandma and stuff like that. And I talked to, women who are trying to get police reports about domestic violence related issues. And it's like, they're not getting official response letters. It's like that, that's not okay. And maybe there just wasn't anything there. And like, people are kind of thinking, like, this is informal. There's nothing there. I don't need to go through the trouble, but like, like need to have that human to human conversation. We also need to follow a process and make sure everybody knows what the steps are. Make sure you give an appropriate response. They know what their rights are. They know the next step in the process. Let's see, I ramble a bit. What else were we talking about? Just any like advice for records officers on the appeals process.
Talk about process so you would say you would like every record officer to understand the importance of having a response, a complete response that tells them if anything was withheld and how to appeal.
Yeah.
What would you say, Melanie?
Some of that, know your deadlines. There's a lot of times people will let things slip and forget, and Eric is 100% accurate. The communication goes a long ways when we forget something, and we're human, and it's okay to be human. So if it's a deadline that gets missed, communicate, because it's very important that we work with our requesters. It's not intended to say I forgot, or excuse me, not intended to be ignored. It's just it got further down the list than I had planned on. So communicate that side of things. The other end of it is know the statute. If it's a record that's not something that you can release, understand the statute and why you're denying it. I've seen in my history of doing requests, that we're not always citing the best statute that supports your response, and it's very important that you understand why you're saying no to somebody, because it's part of the appeal process. Understanding that and how you approach something is beneficial to that learning process, making sure that what we're doing is supporting our response. But the best advice I could give, going back my years of doing it, is just learn and educate yourself as to what the process is. It's very complicated. It's not intuitive. It's a great big gray area, but understand where you fit in the grand scheme of things, understand where you can and can't give records, understand your CAO is a good resource. A lot of times it does have to go to somebody else in order for you to say yes or no, but just understand where it is, where you can and can't do something, and just educate yourself further on how to move forward with that process, because grant is an interesting thing, is you can become very, very skilled and educated at it. And even after all that, you still don't know everything, and you're not going to know everything, and that's what's fun about it. It's a challenge, and it's very educational in respect to how to grow within that world, and it's a fun opportunity to be part of it if you allow yourself to be. And to that point, it's great to have Eric here to give that perspective. Because I do think it is beneficial to understand it from the requester's perspective of how can I do something, how best to approach this. So it's a healthy environment to be part of. It's very educational.
Thank you. Nancy?
Well, I think too, like, think how much records have changed since GRAMA was adopted by the legislature, right? And they add things to the protected column, but they don't. Seems like they're too afraid to touch it, to try and address records a little bit more and help us understand how to navigate that, maybe, and being able to produce some of those electronic records and be able to redact them. You know, it's a really difficult process. I find that if I use a redaction log, it really helps the requester. It helps the appeal process. It can be a little tedious. Like if I just have small requests, I'll just put it in my letter. Like a police report, when we do a police report, it's clear when we redact like the address or whatever, because it says address and then it's blocked out, right? So I don't worry about it on stuff like that. But I recently had a records request where they asked for a bunch of emails, and he was an alleged perpetrator of domestic violence. And the emails between the victim's advocate and the victim are protected under the statute of the law. And so there were quite a few emails being denied, right? So my redaction log became really important for the appeal process too, right? So that he knew these existed and these were the dates that he was from, but it's being withheld under this statute. It's not subject to GRAMA. And so I think those kinds of preparations as you're in the appeal as you're in the records process will help the appeal process go a lot smoother. I think preparation is just really important as you move through the appeal process. Like the first place that my city manager goes when he gets an appeal is to my office, right? Like, what can you tell me about this? And I generally, if I think that a requester is going to appeal, I will CC him on my response. And so sometimes he isn't aware if I didn't think about it. I can generally tell, but sometimes people will appeal anyway. And so he'll come to my office, and so if I'm prepared when he comes in, and we start the process of figuring out how we're going to respond, like if we get the attorney involved. I have an in-house attorney, so I'm able to get my attorney involved a lot sooner than maybe a small municipality. But just being prepared and getting people involved along the process that need to be involved, And if it escalates to the director, like, be prepared, like, having sat on the SRC, just having the people you need there to answer questions that you might not be able to answer, having your attorney really understand what process you've been through before you arrive there, making sure that you provide all of the information you're required to provide 5 days before the hearing. Just, it helps the whole process. It helps you, it helps the director, it helps your attorney. If you're making those preparations in advance and you're working through that process and not, it's so easy to just wanna, I saw a meme very recently. Oh, it's my grandma feel today, I'm not going. It's so easy to feel that way, but it's so much easier and better, like, if you're prepared.
Thank you, guys. I want to turn some time over to you if you have any questions for our panelists.
I have one.
Yes.
It's for Eric. What is some of the best advice? Like if you've made a records request and it was really vague, what was some of the best advice, or when you first started this, what was some of the best things that a records officer has told you as far as narrowing down your search?
I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's all just like the basics, like thinking about like, like I remember when I first started like filing grandmas, because sometimes I'd be interested about how people in an office were communicating about a hot button topic, and I think I mentioned this before, like I filed a request where it was like, I think it was years ago at the AG's office, and I like asked for every attorney's email for this search topic, and like so, like kind of like learning to like, like maybe that's like a conversation you have with the requester and saying like, well, where, how do we narrow this down? Like you're looking for discussion about a topic of interest. We don't need to search the, the, the janitor's email or something like that. Like who are the relevant people that would actually be discussing this? When is the time frame that they would actually be discussing this? What are the keywords that they would actually be discussing? So I think like any like advice you can give like on like specifics of things like that. I mean, that's like communications, but and then just like kind of learning different, like the most useful stuff, like kind of like learning all the time was like kind of like what is like a record called? And that's kind of like what I mentioned at the beginning. Like you might be able to help out a requester by saying like, well, I can tell you how our system, what we call certain documents, and then that might help you with your request. Because, oftentimes any requester, reporter, average citizen, they're probably coming at it with like kind of a vague understanding of like, well, there should be some kind of document about something that I'm interested in. I just don't know what it's called. So that's where like things are going to start vague. So like that kind of help, like what is the document called? What does it look like? Yeah, I mean, I think those are the kinds of specific things. Yeah, I think just to reiterate, I think would be useful to like kind of share with a requester.
We're in government, we all
Thank
have
you.
jargon and terms that one of the requesters might not think of, right?
Mhm.
I kind of comment, I just like the idea of asking a requester for what they would like the keyword search to be. Like, I haven't thought, I guess I haven't thought about asking them, like, I've looked at, like, the one I just did, I looked at what the request was, and I determined a keyword search, but I told them in my response that what keywords I had used in my search, so they would know. But boy, it'd probably save me a lot of time if I would just ask them up front, what keywords would you like me to search?
Yeah, because
Yeah,
they weren't they thinking about changing the grammar to say that like you have to like come up with your own keywords, but it's like still the case, like people can just say a topic, and then they leave it up to you guys to figure out how to
Yeah.
search for it, so.
I built it
Yeah,
last year.
yeah, so brainstorming about like
Yeah.
keywords and like,
Yeah.
you know, how to search it, you know, like, what if I'm gonna search this name and this variation on this name and, like that. That might like kind of get them involved, like you're kind of working together a little bit, help with that kind of trust and fulfill the request.
I would say if I could.
Go ahead.
On keyword search, I just found this on a request I did that I finished up yesterday, and the city attorney and I were going over because it has some legal implications, and I had done a keyword search in Microsoft's content management system, and I had this Teams string, and the attorney, because he was in on that string, said it's not all there. And I said, what? Because it had multiple people. So I thought and figured it probably was. But the last two people's comments weren't in there because they didn't use the words I had done a keyword search on. And so that was like way wide. That opened my eyes a lot to look at these a little differently on keyword search. So just kind of something I learned just yesterday that might be a good approach to how to send its advice, like that could tell you if it was a valid by the street. I don't know. It was just something that came up with me yesterday.
We have a second set of eyes, and I'm so grateful for that because we're human. We miss things or may look at it one way when somebody's looking at it a different way. And I just love the fact that, well, maybe they're asking this instead of this, and then it ends up being a call or something so that we're interpreting it right.
Yeah.
I have another question. Yes, over here.
Can you guys talk about fees a little bit and waivers? Is that set per agency or is that under statute? It's kind of gray for us to conform as we get into that realm.
So is your question how do you determine a fee for?
Yes. So is that, does each agency determine their own fee or is that like a bigger umbrella?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a little different with the state and local government, isn't it? So, Nancy, how do you determine fees when you get a request?
So we have established our fees by ordinance. And so we raised, not recently, it's been maybe 3 or 4 years ago. We used this, I said, because we just had like, the fee wasn't even close to the person's hourly wage because wages have changed so much, right? So we were looking at it and there's different parts of the process that like sometimes only the attorney can respond, right? His hourly wage is a lot more than mine. And so we actually did put into our ordinance that it would be the lowest paid employee capable. And so we didn't put a dollar amount except on police reports. We have a set dollar amount. And so it does, the one thing about that is it doesn't help the requester get a feel for, okay, like how much am I going to pay? So the estimate in the early stages of the request is really important. And just do your best to try and estimate. But I think you should, like, before when I was on state records committee, we always ask, have you adopted that fee by ordinance? And I guess it's just important to have a way for the requester to get some idea, you know, how much are they going to try and charge me for this, right? Because of that first 15 minutes being free, there's a lot of records I never charge for. If I don't have to redact something and I pull it out of software, I don't charge for it, right? And even sometimes if it took me 30 minutes to pull it out of software, whether it's redaction, so I didn't have to do any software ran it, right? I just had to make sure it was in proper form. I don't charge for that kind of thing. You know, when Ron and I do an email search, you bet I charge. When I do when we do video redaction, we charge. Like those are just so time consuming for the agency that, and it takes us away from our other duties, then We do, but we're always, the fee is part of the process verbally. We try to get a feel and an estimate, like I will go into Microsoft eDiscovery and I will run a keyword search just to get a feel for how many records, like I did when last week, and the word was Chevron. I thought it would be like a really low amount of hits. It was 20,000 hits. So like then I had to go back and get a better keyword, right? I don't want to go through 20,000 hits. I know it's not, I mean, it was like 300 mailboxes or something like that. I'm going to go look at how many of those really had Chevron in them, right? But anyway, and so I went back and we came up with a different keyword search, right? So that, because I'm going to charge that person any, and then I have to, because I really do, I fundamentally believe that these records belong to the public. And sometimes I feel like the fee becomes a barrier to them obtaining the record. And I feel guilty every time I feel like I just told someone an estimate. Like if it's hundreds of dollars, I feel guilty about it. I don't think it should be. And so I'm trying to find ways to produce that record as best I can. But if I don't charge a fee, then my upper people, they kind of get mad at me. So when it takes me a long time, they're okay with it. Stuff, but and so there's a careful balance, right? And it's really true that there are some records that just require a lot from us to produce, and that's what the appeals process is. Your CAO can determine, hey, we're willing to waive that, and we're encouraged to do so, right? If it meets a certain criteria. But if it's taking resources from other parts of the organization, I feel like those are important times to really consider.
Jordan?
Yeah, I saw your hand go up.
We're together. So on the fee thing, can we not charge a fee? Like, do agencies have to charge fees?
Don't leave it.
Because we let it go to an hour before we start charging fees, and then we'll send a response that there's this and this and this, and if you'd like to do an additional request for whatever they want. But sometimes like billing somebody a fee of like $30. I mean, obviously we charge on giant stuff, but billing somebody $30 and we send the invoice and then the accounting people have to process. I mean, like, what's the point of that? Because how much does it cost the state to get this person to pay us $30?
I totally agree with that. Like I constantly tell my by the time I bill them and they pay and the downstairs people take the payment and we've spent $30. So it's my argument all the time. And no, I don't think, in fact, I think GRAMA encourages you to do as much as you can without charging fees. You have to go by what your organization determines is the best practice.
Melanie, does your department have to have any fees in statute, or do you set them by policy? Is it case by case?
Lowest paid employee is able to process the record, and it's interesting. DPS does roughly 30,000 GRAMA requests a year, and you've got your agency that guides that. There are going to be those requests that it doesn't look like it's a whole lot. It's going to be quick and easy to do. And so we are able to help out where we can. We've got those requests that we've had everybody in the office that's had to look at this because it is so complicated. And that fee and how you approach it is going to be 100% dependent on what the request is and how you approach doing it. So the best advice I could give you is do that evaluation, make sure that what you are doing and what you're providing matches what fee that you request from that person. Again, that complicated request, there's going to be a fee there potentially, depending on how your agency approaches it. Those easy requests, maybe not so much, but set that up and set those expectations from the get-go. Give that estimate so the customer knows what it is that you're going to be asking for them to for payment in order to produce that record. So the best advice is to use the guidance of your agency and what they support and approach it that way and how much work you're having to put into something to produce that record.
So Eric, you mentioned a little bit at the beginning about having a lot of responsive records, and so the fees are really expensive. How do you feel about do you feel a difference between a response that says this is an estimated fee that's just the cost of getting records versus one that feels like a denial?
How do I feel about it?
Are there certain kinds of responses that you get that feel more like one or the other?
Yeah, I think certain responses that really quote a high amount can feel like it's essentially a denial. And part of that, maybe it's a failing on my part if it's like got to that point, like I haven't had a conversation with that records officer to figure out why it's so expensive, things like that. But yeah, I mean, like I think oftentimes like an agency says like, well, this is the estimate and we need this certain deposit. I just pay it because I know it's not actually going to end up being that costly. It's like, I think like once records start getting processed, it's not going to be as bad as it's billed as. But it's also just like kind of good to know that that's not the case with all records. And I think I kind of wonder if like maybe with your agency's website on your GRAMA page or something like maybe there should be like a little disclaimer that's like certain records can be processed quickly and without charge. As a requester, you should be mindful. Like email searches or like you're requesting body cam and somebody has to watch 6 hours of body cam and then I figure out whose face to blur, like that will take time. Like I think like when people know that they're not gonna get sticker shock if like that's what they're asking for and then they get a big estimate. I had kind of a question related to fees. I've actually this would be a great opportunity. So in GRAMA, right, like you can inspect records for free. But I've always like wondered like if the records officer needs to like redact something, you still get charged, right? Like if you go in to look at a record and they had to like take something out, like
Yeah, if they have to redact something. What do you do, Nancy, when someone wants to inspect a record, but you
does
don't
that
have to
happen anymore
redact
for
it?
you?
It doesn't happen anymore. I mean, it used to, in the past. I'm trying to think how many I've had asked to have inspected that were actually not completely public, because usually I would get something like, I want to come read your minutes. Those are public anyway. It feels like people kind of know now that some of the records have private information in them, and so they generally ask for copies. I'm just trying to think. I don't know, I'd have to ask my attorney because I would tend to redact it in. But see it for free. But my attorney might not let me do that.
It's another case by case basis.
Yeah, right. It would depend on how many records too, right? Like if it's just one, let's say it's just one page of a police report that has a little bit of caption on it. Wait, didn't take me that long. I don't know. But certainly if it's like 30 pages of redactions, then yeah. You probably, yeah, that's a tough one. I often think about that. If anyone ever asked me to inspect record after make redactions, charge them redactions.
Well, sorry, wouldn't it be more, if you have to make redactions, it's not one that they can come in and inspect because it's not public information? So wouldn't you kind of,
In that they should still have the opportunity to come and inspect.
Okay.
Interesting.
yeah,
And
that's,
any
Cause I wonder if that's like a throwback more to like when people were like, so like inspecting would allow you to not pay for copies when everybody used to like print out copies and charge you like a quarter
Yeah.
cent.
Yeah, because
Gee, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I do have another question, not be related. So, Leisha and I are with DEQ, and we are both very new to being record officers. Our immediate supervisor sometimes will come up with things that makes it harder for us to do our job. Like she'll give us advice like, oh, well, don't provide this to them because we need to make the public learn how to use our portal, which isn't gonna happen. And you know, and the B thing is kind of makes it hard for us. How, as for us as records officers, we are trying to serve our, you know, people. It's all, and I don't really care much about fees as far as charging our requesters because it's all corporate and it's like environmental stuff. So very few of them are just people asking for records. So, you know,
Yeah.
so we don't really, I don't feel bad about people getting fees when it's, you know, environmental stuff. But like, how do we navigate that when our people above us are making it difficult for us to do things, but we also want to help our requesters as much as we can?
Let's see, so, Melanie, you're a CAO.
At the end of the day, it is a business decision. Every ounce of providing a record does cost money. And so that's probably why, I don't say why, it's a lot of what guides how we approach our GRAMA requests. And so to that, I would say refer to your agency with that business response. But at the end of the day, if it's reasonable, and I'm going to throw that word in there where that reasonable standard applies, if it's something we can help and it's immediate and it's quick and it satisfies the response, it's definitely something we want to support. There's also going to be those instances where it's even after everything's said and done and we want to approach our records requests this way and have them use the portal and things like that. Those things still cost money. Your portals cost money, your technology in order to support those records cost money. And so there's going to be that fine line of how do we provide that record, but yet still do it in such a way that it doesn't end up drowning the agency as far as costing the staff, the time, the resources to produce the document. As I say, I'm going to refer you back to your agency with that because there is a very fine line of how best to approach it. And that guidance will be there. But it does exist, and that's why that fee standard is established, is so we can charge a reasonable cost to produce the record if it does cost us in order to produce that. So just keep that in mind.
I'm going to make a plug for some resources at the Division of Archives and Record Service. We do have the Government Record Ombudsman. She's standing over there, who can absolutely help if navigating a request and coordinating with people in the office is a bit difficult to respond to a request. We also have a team of records and information management specialists, and there is a person who is there just for your entity.
We know you took her from us.
Okay. And so, yeah, she's awesome and we love her. But yeah, we absolutely have our REM specialists who can help facilitate a conversation with your CAO, maybe having some risk in IT, your whole records management team, and help you get some of those relationships. But we're happy to help wherever we can when it comes to records management. In fact, Kendra is sitting back there. She is the manager of our records and information management team.
I'm here incognito. I'm
Sorry. All right, we are almost out of time. So I had one question for each of our panelists that I thought would be fun. And so I'm going to start with Nancy. Is there anything that you've seen in your time on the State Records Committee that has changed the way you answer record requests?
Like everything. It was such a great experience, and like I said, I just like to learn. And I learned to be like a lot more specific. I learned to do redaction logs. I learned to communicate better with my requesters. I learned that it was okay to charge fees. I mean, I think that was kind of big because I've always, like I said, been like, fees, just do it, you know. And that really the fees are supported, but I don't know. And we saw all kinds up there, a lot of appealers that like agencies, a lot of agencies have people who teeter on the edge of maybe being vexatious, right? And you're really struggling to deal with them. Let the appeal process help you deal with them. That's what it's there for, right? And then just try and keep emotion out of it. Just facts, right? Like it's not about you. And that's hard because sometimes they try to make it about you, right? But it seemed like we had really good results on the SRC when everybody came prepared and it was just the facts. And then so if the director now can ask the questions that maybe they can answer. And then just having the people there that can answer questions, like the records officer should probably be there, even if the attorney's directing whoever responded to that request in the beginning should be there to help answer questions that maybe the attorney's not as, he knows the law, but he doesn't know maybe the process as well as the records officer. But I think the appeal process is meant to help, not be a burden. And I guess the other thing I'd say is always get your notice of compliance in on time. Tell Rebecca, because that can really cause problems for you if you don't. So like when the director orders you to release records, you have to file a notice of compliance with 5 business days. Is that what it is? 7 business days.
Within 30 calendar days.
What's that?
Within 30 calendar days.
Oh yeah,
in order.
30 calendar days on that one.
And sooner is always better. Because
Yeah.
Petitioner also
You
only
get it
has 30
done
days
and
to
get that
appeal.
notice of compliance in so that it doesn't come back to the records committee. Well, it was the records committee then, but to the director that you didn't do what you were supposed to. Because generally these people that want something from you and they're now have been granted the opportunity to get something from you, they are watching to see if you file your notice of compliance. So, just make sure that you get that done. But yeah, just to remove the emotion. Just facts, I think that's a big one. It's part of the process. It's meant to help, not be a burden.
And Melanie, is there anything that record officers could do that would make receiving and answering an appeal simpler at your level in the process?
With my side of things, I'd be very meticulous in why you did what you did. Because like Nancy said, when something's appealed, the first person I go talk to is the person that responded to the request. And it's very helpful for me to understand what your thought process was, why you approached it that way, and your follow through with it. So it helps me explain our position better if we choose to go that route and support the denial, or if I'm looking at something and it's just not quite adding up. But it helps me have those conversations again with the requester and what they're looking for and how best I can help them. We work with Monica. Great opportunity. Use Monica's services because there are times that it's beneficial to have a third person in the room to talk through what it is that we can and can't do, or what works and what doesn't work. Be very meticulous in your notes, and it helps that process. Because if it does end up going to being appealed elsewhere, it's going to be necessary to have those in order to support the decision going forward.
Thank you. And Eric, for you, I was wondering if you have ever seen anything in a response from an entity that you wish everyone across the board would adopt.
I was thinking about that, I think part of it's just it's like that communication, it's that cooperation. I think a really quick response is really welcome, like if it's possible. Because sometimes, you request something and whether it's granted or denied, if that's done quickly, that's a really big relief. But it's really annoying if I've put in a request and then the denial is essentially oh, we don't have that. And it was it was a determination that obviously was made very quickly, but they wait till the 10th business day to tell me like, oh, we don't have that. It's like, oh, now you're telling me like, okay, so my time's not that valuable. Okay, I've just been waiting 2 weeks for your answer. That's cool. But like, I was thinking about like the things that like grandma does allow you to do. Like I was also thinking about like, I forget the code or whatever. It's like encouraging, a requester, like that they might be able to get records at a different agency. Like I've worked with like records officers have been like super helpful with like projects. They're kind of like they know like what grandma allows and encourages them to do to help and like being really willing to play ball with that. Like we did a story, like a series a few years ago about domestic violence. And we did this big project about people who like killed their significant others and then did this huge data project to see like what kind of criminal encounters they had that led up to that. But it meant like trying to figure out what police departments a person interacted with throughout the entire state. But that was one where like I filed a request with with Candy at Salt Lake City, and she's like, "Well, I can encourage you to look in these other departments about these people to find out their reports." It's like doing stuff like that was like that's really helpful to like certain projects. Is like just know like what you can do. Like if you get a request and you know right off the bat that you could respond to them that day, whether it's good news or bad news, they're gonna appreciate a prompt response, that thing. So communication, cooperation, where possible.
Thank you. Are there any last thoughts before we end our panel? Okay. All right, well, I want to thank you so much for coming and humoring me and having this event. And I really appreciate all of you coming. I know gas is expensive, it's the middle of the day, but I really appreciate you all being here. This is being recorded, so this will be probably posted to our YouTube page, maybe the next newsletter. And we have the ombudsman here, I'm here, and no ex parte communications if you've got an appeal, but the director is also here if you want to talk to him too. Thank you so much for being here. That is it. Thank you so much.
It's so great to have your perspective.